I'll tell you about the first one afterwards. So it was 1987 and it was December. And that year I had given birth to a little baby girl in July. And about a month after the birth, I was injured. And I'll add more to that in a bit. I was injured and I went to a doctor, and the initial doctor said, "You're never going to walk again." And I was 31 years old and I wasn't able to accept that idea. So I ended up asking friends around me, and they said, "Go to this neurosurgeon. He's totally the top guy in Santa Barbara." So I made an appointment, and he looked at my x-rays and my CAT scans and my PET scans and said, "I can fix this." So I was excited about the thought of walking again. And it was an injury in my lower back. I had ruptured my L5-S1 disc, and the sciatica and pain in the whole area just was causing me not to be able to even walk. So he scheduled surgery, and in December, I entered the hospital the night before the surgery because he had brought on to the team of his surgical team an orthopedic surgeon, and the two of them had decided that I needed an additional test. So they were going to have a myelogram conducted at the hospital, and that's a test where they inject iodine dye into your spinal cord, and then they tip an x-ray table that you're laying on so that the dye will run down your spinal cord with gravity and go to the area where your blown out disc is and see if maybe a piece of the disc might have chipped your spinal cord, because they want to make sure that they're fixing everything that they need to the next day in surgery. So in the midst of this, they've injected the iodine dye into the back of my neck area up here. They've just numbed it, so I'm perfectly awake and no, anything in my system to make me be, under sedation or anything. And the x-ray tech made a mistake. He began talking to the other x-ray tech who was going to be watching the monitor and taking the pictures when the dye got to the right place in my spine. But they began talking about their weekend plans. And instead of watching where he was pushing his finger on the button of the table, he was pushing the wrong button. And I didn't know it. He didn't know it. No one, two doctors were in the room, the neurosurgeon and the orthopedic surgeon. They were talking to each other. And, this was just a regular, it wasn't any big deal. It wasn't like I was going to die, but I did. So the table started tipping, and I started feeling really funny, because the dye was going right from the back of my neck into my brain. And I felt funny, and I thought, I wonder if I'm supposed to feel like this. And I didn't want to interrupt the two guys. They were the only two people I could see. There was a nurse in the room, but she was over at another table by the door. And I was laying on my back on the x-ray table, and, I really couldn't get anyone's attention. And so I kind of held off too long and didn't say anything. And by the time I realized, okay, look, my eyes are rolling to the back of my head. I don't think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I need to say something. And by the time I thought that and wanted to speak up and get their attention, I actually couldn't speak. And I couldn't raise my hand to touch him or raise my hand to say help or anything. So I was really panicking at that point. And I didn't know what was going wrong. I didn't know his button, the finger was on the wrong button. I didn't know the table was tipping the wrong way. I just knew that something was drastically wrong with me and that I was having a problem. So what ended up happening was that the x-ray tech heard me hyperventilating. It was the last thing that I did before I actually died. And he leaned over the table and he put his head right over my face, and he saw that my eyes were rolling to the back of my head, and I was fighting to make them go forward, so they were going back and forth. And I was hyperventilating, and he then leaned back. The last thing that I saw was him lean back and look to see where his thumb was on the table. And he made this face like, "Oh my God." And that was the last thing that I saw. My eyes just shut in my body. And next second later, I was up on the ceiling, literally right above my body, looking straight down at my body and at the tops of everyone's heads and the top of the equipment and everything. And I, instead of being panicked like I was in my body, I felt absolute calm, absolute love. I felt just the most amazing, wonderful feeling. And so I then ended up saying, "Oh, if I'm up here and my body is down there and that man is calling code blue, I think I just died." And right when I said that, there was this absolute feeling of being next to me. And that's where I felt that I was getting this feeling of, comfort and love and appreciation and kindness and, all the just beautiful. And so I began talking to it, and not with my mouth, of course, because my body was down below, but I began saying very calmly, I really need to go back into my life, because if I leave my children, my 8-year-old son and my 5-month-old daughter, if I leave them in this way at this time, they won't grow up to be the good human beings that they're capable of being. I need to go back. And so the being wasn't saying anything to me, but I said that during the time of them starting all the resuscitation. They immediately started mouth to mouth and chest compressions. The 2 x-ray techs were doing that. And the doctors were yelling orders, and the nurse was on the phone calling for the defib unit, stat. And, big uproar in the room. A nurse came in with an oxygen card, and they put that on my face, so they stopped blowing in my mouth. And they continued to just, the 2 x-ray techs switch turns doing the chest compressions for 2 minutes at a time. And then this man came in with a heart monitor, and I didn't know what it was. And he was peeling off these little white things to put them on my chest. And as I was up on the ceiling talking to the being, I was watching him too. And he was the only thing that I didn't understand what was happening. And I said to the being in the midst of my talking and asking to go back, I said, what is that he's doing? And right then I was moved right in front of the box, which was on a ledge on the wall. And then the man was standing in between the box and the table where I was laying. And I just had this box right in front of my face in my consciousness, not my body, of course. And so the man's hand crossed between the box and my consciousness, and he flipped this little toggle switch on the side of the box, and then he withdrew his hand. And I watched as this little green light in this long rectangular part of the top of the front of the box lit up, and it started making a monotone sound, and it started traveling across the screen. And I still did not know what it was. And I watched it go all the way across the first time, second time, and then the third time, about a third of the way over, it hit me of what it was. And I said, oh, that's a heart monitor. I don't have a heartbeat. It's a flat line. And when I said that, then I was moved back up to the ceiling again, next to the being, and I was watching from above again. So it was kind of like I was moved down there to see what it was I asked for, and then when I figured it out, I was back up again. So I was continuing to watch everything down below, and the neurosurgeon said to the orthopedic surgeon, too much time has passed. She's going to be brain dead. We need to do something. And so the orthopedic surgeon said, stand clear. And the 2 guys that were up there doing the chest compressions and up around the front of the table, and the nurse that was up there, they all stepped back. And the orthopedic surgeon took 2 steps forward, took his hand from behind his back, and he just came down and struck the center of my chest. And I'd never seen that either. I didn't know what that was. I found out years later from a nurse friend of mine that's called a precardial thumb. It is done in last-ditch situations where they don't have the defib unit in there and the person needs to be resuscitated, and that can shock the heart back into beating. So he struck my chest. I watched my body, even though I wasn't in it, I watched it respond to that, because that hard of a blow, your body kind of jerks. And then up on the ceiling, the being said to me in this beautiful voice I could never imitate well. It was so precious. And it went, but if you go back, you'll still be in your marriage. What will you do? And the story behind it is that I was married to an engineer here in Santa Barbara, and I had moved down from Oregon, where I had met him up in Oregon, and we had briefly known each other maybe 9 months or something up there. Then we moved down here and we got married in Santa Barbara. And about 3 months later, I started to see who he was really, and he started to be really abusive to me, to my son. I didn't have my daughter yet. And so I went through a lot of trauma, a lot of being hurt, a lot of damage, a lot of danger, and trying to protect my son, trying to get my husband to change, trying to help him, marriage family therapist rejected, pastor of church rejected, letters to him, crying, pleading. I left him for a year. He begged me to come back and said that he'd changed. Of course he hadn't. And so I'd never been around someone who was abusive before, and there wasn't any locations in Santa Barbara, any groups or clubs or anything for me to find anything out about that. And the internet really wasn't up and running at that time. And I didn't really know what to do. So I ended up with this traumatic person, and he had actually injured my back. So that's why I had the problem with my back. And he had actually injured me during the pregnancy. And I almost lost the baby as well. So I was struggling with all of that. And what ended up happening was that when I'm going to say it's God, because that's who it felt like to me, when he said, you'll still be in your marriage, what will you do? He showed me all these film clips that just went flash. And they were incidents that I had actually been involved in with my husband, where he had hurt me, hit me, berated me, knocked me to the floor, pushed me against the wall, etc. So I was shown all the abuse, and then I was given all the time to think about all the things that I had done to try to help him change in the 7 years that I'd been married to him. So I realized at the end of thinking about the things that I'd done, that he wasn't capable of changing, that I'd done everything that I possibly could. And so I said to the being, after I thought of all those things and I came to that conclusion, I said, if you let me go back, I promise you that I'll get strong enough to leave him. I realized I was really reduced in my personal power by what he had done over the years and the things that he had done, and I needed to get strong. So the second that I said the word him in that sentence, the doctor did the second precardial thump, struck my chest, and my eyes shut from up on the ceiling, and I opened my eyes and I had the oxygen mask over my face. I was back in my body. And I knew everything that had just happened up there, and I'd watched everything that had just happened down below. And it was, I was alarmed, and I said into the oxygen mask, what just happened? And the nurse looked over at, kind of leaned over, and she said, stop, don't talk. We need to stabilize you. So for 20 minutes, they did whatever it was that they had to do to stabilize me. And then they finally took the oxygen mask off. And I said again, what just happened? I was up on the ceiling and I could see and hear everything. And the neurosurgeon standing right next to the table, he goes, oh, brother. But that was a beautiful moment, because it made me, at 31 years old, completely recount what I had just seen from up on the ceiling. So I said, no, she was on the phone calling for the defib unit, pointing at the nurse that was over at the table by the desk, by the corner of the room. And you were talking to him, and you were yelling out this, and you said that. And then they were doing chest compressions. And when the oxygen cart came in, she brought it in, and I completely told them what had just happened. And while I was doing that, the neurosurgeon clenched his fists, and he had this look on his face and he went, I'm not going to stand here and listen to this. And he stormed out of the room. But the orthopedic surgeon stayed, took my hand, and everybody else stayed. And they were all in shock. They were just like, and he said, what else did you see? And tell me again what you saw. What did you feel? What was it like? So he was asking me questions to, understand more about what I'd just been through, but the other doctor scoomed out of there. So the next day they did the surgery. No one in the hospital, I was there 4 days, no one would talk to me about it. Even the next day when I was in the recovery area after the surgery, the two doctors were coming towards me, and I said, what happened last night during my myelogram? And the neurosurgeon guy put his hand up and said, I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to tell you what happened during your surgery. I'm not going to discuss that. And so I was really closed down by all of that. And when my now ex-husband came to visit me later that day, I told him what had happened. And he said, oh, that couldn't have happened. You probably hallucinated it. So I didn't talk about it with anybody because I was not the type of person. I'd never done drugs. I had a secret clearance with the Department of Defense, which means they go through your background like fine-tooth comb. And my mom had been a police officer, and I was always never drugs, never alcohol. I was just like, didn't want to do that stuff. So what ended up happening was that I just buried it for about 12 years. And I ended up talking with a nurse at the hospital that was a friend of mine, and she ended up telling me it was a near-death experience. And so by that time, the internet had come up, and I was able to see the IONS organization online, as well as the NDERF organization, which is the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, run by Dr. Jeffrey Long. And so I ended up writing up a very brief synopsis of my near-death experience, because he posts those on his website, thousands and thousands of them. And I didn't think anything of it. And about 2 years later, 2011, 2009, I ended up getting called by him, and he told me about the IONS conference that was going to be in San Diego, California. And so he said, if you'd like to go, you'd meet a lot of other experiencers there. That was really amazing to me, that I would get to meet someone else who'd had the same experience, because of course, you feel really alone when it happens to you. You're not sure. So I went, and I had an amazing time. And what ended up happening was that I met PMH Atwater after one of her talks. And she's a very big researcher in the near-death experience field. And she had talked about the different aspects that are after a near-death experience, what the after effects are for experiencers. And it really threw me off, because when she was speaking about the after effects, which would be like intuition and precognition and manifestation and the types of things that, people think are woo out there in the big world. Well, it was really interesting to me, because I realized as she was talking that I'd had all of the things that she said were after effects long before I had my NDE at age 31. I'd had them all the way back to my childhood. And so I was very disconcerted when she said that. And I sat there and thought about it. And how could I have these all the way back if I didn't have my NDE till I was 31? So I approached her after her talk, and I told her that, I was questioning that. And she said, you need to talk with your family and find out if there was something that may have happened to you when you were young that you haven't been told about. Well, at the time I thought, really? I had another near-death experience when I was young. Come on, I didn't say that to her. She didn't know that I was thinking that, but it was just like, what? And wouldn't my family tell me?
Yeah.
So I was seeing my brother a month later. He's 10 years older than me. And I needed to figure out a way to tell him that I wanted him to tell me if anything happened without actually telling him my near-death experience, because I'd never told anybody in my family. And so we went up to have dinner with him. And before we went into the restaurant, I said, hey, Brad, I'm doing this medical review of my entire life. And I've got all my, vaccinations listed and all my surgeries listed and everything that's major. I want to have that ready in case I ever have anything go on in my life that doctor would need to see that. So all my records are in place. And so if you can remember anything from my early childhood that I need to add, that you remember, please let me know. So we had this wonderful dinner with his wife and his daughter, and we were having so much fun. My husband, I got remarried, by the way, to a wonderful person. That's the other answer, is not the bad guy. So he's no longer around so we were having this dinner, and afterwards we were outside the restaurant, and he said, hey, he put his hand on my arm, and my brother said, Barb, there's something I need to tell you. And at this time I was 53 years old. So my first, NDE, I didn't know about. The second one was at age 31. And I found out about the first one when I was 53 years old. He told me that I'd had a very high fever at age 18 months. My mom was very pregnant with my little sister, who's about 18 months younger than me. So it was right about the time she was ready to deliver. And that I had gone into convulsions and stopped breathing. And the fire department was called, and they were sending an ambulance over, and they told my parents to submerge me up to my neck in tepid bath water, and then slowly add ice cubes to slowly lower my body temperature so I wouldn't go into shock. And my brother was standing there when I self-resuscitated. He said, you just came back to life. You were soft purple. You hadn't been breathing for quite a long time. He said, there was nothing alive about you. And he said, all of a sudden, you just arched your back, took a deep breath, and burst into tears like a redheaded Barbie would usually do at 18 months old. So he said, you had this situation happen when you were 18 months old, you died. And so I couldn't believe it. So I ended up telling my brother about my near-death experience. He was very open to it because of what he'd seen earlier in my life. So the NDEs both opened me to the after effects that I feel that I've had all through my life. And I've had these amazing experiences. So I want to tell you the truck accident before.
Yes, I want you to tell this. This is one of my favorite stories.
Okay, so I had gone up to the San Francisco area and talked at 5 different IANS groups, and I'd been up there 4 days. My husband and I had driven up together, and he was driving me back down from San Francisco. It's about 5.5 hours to Santa Barbara. And just north of Santa Barbara, along the coastline, is what's called the Gaviota Coast. And a long time ago, it's the reason why the day was created that was, protecting the Earth Day, like Earth Day, was created in Santa Barbara because of a big oil spill that happened on the Gaviota Coast way back 1970s or something. So we're right there. We were coming from inland, and we turned the corner, coming along the 101 freeway, heading southbound. We're about 35 minutes north of Santa Barbara. And these big gusty winds always happen in that area because there's this big kind of tunnel between the mountains, and it comes through there, and it just is really gusty. And so we came around this corner, and these gusts of wind were kind of pushing against the side of the van. And I was laying back in my seat of the car on the passenger side, and I had my feet up on the dashboard, and I was just relaxing, and it was just getting dark, and I was looking out the window at the moon and the stars, and we were almost home, and nothing was worrisome. And this big gust of wind hit the side of the van, and where I was leaning back, I could see my husband struggling with the steering wheel to keep the car under control. And after it calmed down, the gust calmed down, and Victor was still on the road, thankfully, I said, Victor, I don't think we should do 65 with these big gusts of wind. I think we should slow down to 50 because we could lose control really easily. So what do you think? Let's do 50, okay? And he said, yeah, I think that's a good idea. So he slowed down to 50. And I thought, we're okay. We're doing 50, we're safe. About 5 minutes later, I'm just looking out the window at the moon and the stars and stuff, and this voice in my ear on the side of the ocean side says, danger, big impact ahead, danger, big impact. And I'm like, so I sit up in my chair, I pull my chair up, and I put my feet on the floor, and I made sure that my seatbelt was nice and tight against me, and I'm right in case we're going to hit something, I want to be tight in my chair and everything. And then I realized I need to talk to Victor and say something. So I said, Victor, you know how I sometimes hear from the other side? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, I just heard danger, big impact ahead, danger, big impact. And I said, so something, I don't know if it's a tree that's down, I don't know if it's a car that's stalled, I don't know what it is, but something bad is up ahead and we have to slow down further. I think we should do 30 miles an hour. And he goes, Barbara, we're on the freeway. We can't do 30. And I turned around and looked through our van, and it was absolutely black behind us. There's no street lights out there or anything. It's just this really rural 101 freeway along the ocean. And so I said, there's no one behind us. No one is going to care whether we are going 30 or 50 or 65. So why don't you do 30? And then if we need to, what we can do is speed up if somebody catches up to us. If you see lights in the rearview mirror, then speed up again if you feel more comfortable doing that until they pass us, and then we can slow down. He goes, okay, I can do that. So we're going along at 30 miles an hour, and about another 5 to 10 minutes later, we come around a corner, and up ahead in the dark is this police car, and its lights are, whirling around, and I don't know what's up there, but I felt immediately right here, that's where the danger was. And so I was really on high alert, leaning forward, trying to see out the windshield, what's up there in the dark. I can see the police car, but I can't see anything else. We're in the slow lane, and as we're coming along, we see that the police car isn't stopped off the freeway in the median strip. It is stopped squarely blocking the slow lane. So as we're coming up behind it, we're going to have to change lanes to go around it. So I start looking to see where the police officer is, and there's no police officer in the car, and neither is he anywhere within the range of his lights. So why would he park his car there and then leave it? What's going on? So Victor's coming along and he starts to change lanes about, I don't know, 50 yards behind the police car. He starts to come over to change lanes. And just when he does that, whoever it is that's warning me grabbed both of my upper arms. I literally felt their hands grab my upper arms. They came face to face with me, nose to nose, and they screamed, 10 miles an hour! I was so freaked out that they were touching me and that I could kind of see the shimmery vision of their face. I didn't recognize anybody. It wasn't like it was somebody I knew. And I was so freaked out that they did that I echoed 10 miles an hour, and I said that to Victor. And he had just changed lanes, so he slowed down. So by the time we got level and even with the police car, we were down to 10 miles an hour. And just as we slid past it, maybe another 40, 50 feet, I'm not sure, our lights finally lit up the semi-truck that had gone out of control and turned onto its side, and the dirty bottom of the truck was facing us, so there were no reflectors or anything. And the cop car had pulled up and had parked so far back from the truck that his lights didn't even light up the truck. And so we're heading for the cab of the truck, which is where the gas tanks are. And because we were only doing 10 miles an hour, Victor was able to swerve off into the gravel on the left-hand side of the freeway, not hit the guardrail, and go around the front of the truck. And on the far side, I mean, it was just this big shock. And on the far side, I looked out my window and there was the cop standing up on top of the truck, leaning over, talking to the truck driver. And because of all the wind that was going and blowing, he didn't even know, his back was to the freeway where we were coming from. He didn't even know that we had just passed and gone around the truck. And he, looked startled, and Victor continued going, and I immediately began thanking the other side for that piece of information that saved our life. And about maybe 5 or 10 minutes down the road, Victor was completely silent. He just watched that all unfold, and he just is completely silent. Then he turns and looks at me and he goes, "How is it that you're able to do that, Barbara?" And I said, "Victor, it wasn't me." I said, "I just listen, and I know that the other side is there. It was them taking the time to correct the situation. Maybe it was the truck driver's life that was important that they wanted to save. Maybe it was mine, maybe it was yours, maybe it was the police officers. But for whatever reason, all 4 of us got through that situation because they wanted it to happen that way." And so he was like, "If I had not just experienced that with you and watched that whole thing unfold," he said, "I never would have believed it. Even though I've been married to you all these years," he said, "if you told me and I hadn't been there," he said, "that would have been hard for me to believe." But he said, "Me watching that, wow."
Wow,
So
that is a warning. That's incredible.
it was so cool. I love the other side. I love them, who they are. I love them. I love them. I love them. And I trust them. And I, always I'll go outside and say, "Hey, isn't it a beautiful day? Look at that palm tree. Isn't it gorgeous?" I'm talking to them. They know that I'm their friend. And, it's not, people think, and I'm saying this just in my head. I'm not saying it out loud. I'm just saying it in my head. I'm just sending them the love and the happiness and the joy when I've got something going on. I send that to them too. I appreciate them being in my life. They're definitely there. And I think that if people understand that and trust their intuition when they get that hit and they know something, to just, act on that instead of, thinking, "Oh, I'm just being scared," or whatever, what they want to dismiss it as. I think that's really where they start building up the relationship. And, I love mine. I love it. I love it. Yeah.
You are so blessed. Thank you so much for sharing these synchronistic stories. I think that they will heal people. And now I think people understand a little bit better how it works and that how they can apply it in their own life. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.